Hello, this presentation is going to be about doing some rewriting on text. It has to do with creating text that will work with students of multiple levels. And the basic idea here is that we're going to actually talk about how to rewrite passages of text. This is a huge issue just because we can't expect that the content that we want to teach is going to have text that's written at all of the different reading levels that our students are showing up at. These are two of the big reasons why we might want to spend some time rewriting text. One is that we have this wide variety in reading ability in our classrooms. The way I like to express that is that everyone's at a different place and going a different pace. It's just the truth of teaching reading. It's pretty extreme often in primary grades like first and second grade. We see really huge extremes that way across a regular class. As kids get older, that extreme variety starts to kind of split people off as people who are actually having difficulty with reading and people who caught on very quickly and easily. The other reason for rewritten text is that interest varies among our students. Some of our students have background knowledge or sort of an emotional or personal connection to some of the content that we're teaching, and we need to even that out just as well as we need to even out ability questions. So what are we really looking for? We're hoping for students who have a disposition to approach text regardless of how difficult it is. There's a world out there in front of us that is not going to level text for us. And completely rewritten texts model the opposite of what we hope for, which is that every text has to be written to be matched to my level. And that's not the intent of any of the work that's been done with leveling over the years. We do hope that if we teach third grade, that the content that we're responsible for, that there is text that was written with a general target for third grade or fourth grade or fifth grade. But again, inside of a third grade class, there's going to be a huge variety, and writing a text towards the middle isn't going to help us with the kids who need text that's more complex and interesting, or kids who need text that's super interesting but a little bit less complex in words and sentences. So the big question is that we want to start with the affective side. We always want to start with something that's affective or conative so that kids are approaching the text with a mindset and a heart that's a little bit different than they might have on their own. So we actually teach towards motivation. We teach towards purpose and engagement. So identity choices and attitudes about text that students have are based on their actual experiences reading, things that have actually happened to them as readers. Have they been put down? Have they been built up? Have they had a little bit of both? The achievement levels might have something to do with that, because kids might have been told that they were in the red zone or something like that when their friends were not. Some kids might pick up on the idea that they are an advanced reader. They might be saying weird things like, I read at a sixth grade level when they're in second grade or something like that. And those are all things that are inappropriate for us to encourage as teachers, because they send the wrong message about the approachability of text. Attitudes and identity about text are things that we want to just tell them, if there is a kid who thinks they're reading at sixth grade level and we give them third grade level content area text, it's not a diss to them. It's the idea that we just have a particular approach to the content, and we need to help everybody in the class reach that content. A few things that we know about levels and leveling. The first one is that interest and background knowledge actually change the levels of text. It's been something that's been shown in experimental, quasi-experimental research, which is that a cold reading is a bad idea in every case. We want to spend time talking to kids, getting their heads ready for the text, doing previews, doing walkthroughs, all of those strategies that you might use for a picture book. We use those with informational text as well. And building background knowledge has a couple of components to it. We can build background knowledge by talking not only about the content that we're going to be teaching, but also by making connections to the themes and the social emotional issues that are there in the content that we're teaching. So we want to spend time using strategies to get kids' heads ready before and their hearts ready before they actually approach the text. So How would this look? Let's imagine that you have a piece of textbook text from a Colorado history unit that you're going to be teaching. The priorities for scaffolding or rewriting difficult content text are these four things. The first one is that you should find hook passages that are likely to be engaging. So if I skim and scan through any given Colorado history textbook, there's a lot of boring stuff in there, stuff that I wouldn't start with, the stuff that I would have to wade through. So as the teacher, I want to sift through this chapter, this unit chapter that we're looking at, and find the passages that are likely to be most engaging for kids of my grade level. And the goal that I have in mind is that I have these paragraphs, this small selection, and I want to help as many readers as possible in my classroom tackle just that selection. So instead of asking for the entire text to be rewritten, I'm finding an opening to the chapter. So then what I want to do once I've selected that hook passage is I want to then skim and scan around that passage to find other passages where students will be able to find important context for understanding the selection. So I might, instead of starting from the beginning and going through the end, I might pick a couple of paragraphs in the middle of a section of the text and then number some of the paragraphs around it as paragraphs where you could get additional context and understand more. When necessary, cut, mark, or photocopy, cutting out phrases and passages that don't answer questions about the hook passage, so we can do selections. Then the final thing is that when it comes to actually rewriting, rewrite only the selected passage, that hook passage. And then when we get to the teaching piece, then students would have access to a simplified, maybe even a couple of simplified versions of that passage and the original one, so that we're modeling the moving back and forth between academic and everyday register. So let's talk about that a little bit further and look at it. What is it going to look like? So finding and selecting the hook passage. What are you going to look for? You're going to look for well-told stories, strange facts, topics that are typically interesting to students, and in general, look for some kind of emotional content if you can. If there's emotional content there, that's probably going to be a decent hook. And the idea is that at the beginning, we're only going to read the selected passages, not the entire chapter, just to get kids dipped in, to get them thinking about the chapter and what it has to offer them. So we'll scaffold that small passage by selecting it based on its hook qualities. And then we're going to guide students to selections in the text or provide copies of the selection alone. So instead of just handing it out and saying, turn to chapter 10, we're going to take them right to the specific page. We're going to flip around inside of that chapter to show them that we're kind of starting in the middle and that we're selecting the information. And that's encouraging browsing behavior, which is really what we need to do for kids with informational text, is encourage this browsing behavior. So once we've selected a piece out of the middle of a chapter, what are we going to do to scaffold that? What kind of instruction will students need to get out of frustrational level or instructional level for just that selection? The first thing is to use previewing. So ask students to look at the passage silently before doing an oral reading. And instead of saying read, I would say look at or skim and scan, because what we want them to do is to preview for words they think are difficult to decode and unfamiliar vocabulary meanings. This is actual leveling. Instead of going based on formulas that are based on number of letters per word or number of words per sentence, those kinds of things, we're actually going to have our kids tell us what looks difficult here to you. Then we will use variations on teacher read aloud, partner reading, and paired reading to get kids actually doing the reading. Reciprocal questioning and QAR are appropriate strategies at this point because those are strategies where kids are going to be asking and answering their own questions based on their skim and scan. So we want to build from just skimming and scanning and talking about the text to starting with the idea of comprehension. And we'd also use some discussion afterwards. So reorganizing. We want to ask journalistic questions to prompt searching around the hook passages: who, what, where, when, why, and how. We want to stop and notice and dwell on details that make for interesting inquiry. And some information that we see is hard to categorize based on simple questions. With all of that discussion about the questioning, we then want to mark up a copy that is reorganized and make it a visual model for browsing. This is the kind of thing that would work really well putting up on a document camera. Okay. The third idea is to cut sentences and words that don't support the selection and reorganization that you've done. So if you have extra sentences in the paragraphs that you've selected that don't have anything to do with asking and answering the questions that you've identified or understanding that hook passage, then cut them out. Just strike through them with a pen, whatever it takes to give kids permission to skip those sentences. Since you've already organized things, transition sentences and phrases may no longer be necessary because usually those transition sentences are there to go from paragraph to paragraph. And if you're not reading in order, those transition sentences might be things that you can just write a line through with a pen. When it gets down to it, rewriting the hook passages, you're looking to reduce the sentence complexity without losing the thinking. So, and we're going to reduce vocabulary difficulty without losing the content. So the basic idea is that we want to move from cognitive academic language to basic intersocial communications speech. So I think I always get that Bix part wrong, but we want to go from schoolish language to playgroundish language if we can. So we're looking for a continuum where we're making it more everyday. Okay. Once we've done some rewriting on the passage, we're going to have a simplified version of the passage and we're going to have the original passage. And what we want kids to be able to see is the rewritten passage and the original passage in the same visual presentation. So instead of giving them to them one at a time, we want them to be able to see the easier text and the harder text in the same presentation. Good stuff for the document camera in front of an entire class, or copies that you can make for reading groups. So think about the presentation that you might use for this rewritten text. Again, the idea is that we want to set students up for the idea of approaching difficult text rather than avoiding it. And we're giving them just some scaffolding to show them, you know, these academic words that we run into, they're really the same in many cases as some of the everyday language that we use. You just need a little bit of a boost to get there. The surrounding passages that you've selected to support, don't rewrite those. You want students to ask and answer questions, and what we want to set them up is with a disposition to be able to search and scan for answers and to approach the harder words and sentences in those surrounding passages. So here's a simple example of this from a U.S. history text from 5th grade, government textbook about the Constitution. So the first passage, at first James Madison wasn't sure if adding a Bill of Rights to the Constitution was necessary, but after he talked to many leaders and sorted through different ideas, he changed his mind. He then proposed the set of amendments to Congress that were later known as the Bill of Rights. That's 51 words. So I'm just looking to change some of the vocabulary words, and I want to keep the same sort of thought structure there, but break it down to fewer words if I can. So a rewrite, James Madison did not know if the Constitution needed a Bill of Rights. He listened to other leaders, then he thought, then he changed his mind. He wrote some changes and gave them to Congress to vote on. So there's some civics vocabulary words, like he proposed the set of amendments to Congress to vote on, later known as the Bill of Rights, those kinds of things. I've just decided that what I really need is shorter text that gets the same ideas out there. I pulled Bill of Rights from this area just because Bill of Rights is already up here. So I've already said those words. And then the key changes that I made had to do with some of the complex sentence structure that's here. And this might not be bad if I'm doing a read aloud. This is not super hard text, but I know that for many of my students that words like necessary and proposed, amendments, these are words that might stop people from comprehending right away unless I give them a little bit of scaffolding. So if I actually put this full thing on the document camera and show kids, here's how I made this simplified, and hoping that, with some read through and some skim and scan that they're able to understand this better. I'll talk about a further rewrite in just a moment. But the overall idea here is I can actually measure how much easier I've made this. I've gone from 51 to 38 words, down by 25%, which is a clear indicator for me that I've taken sentence structures and made them less complex. So have I taken sentences and phrases and made them less complex, or have I made them harder? Sometimes we think we're making the right changes and we actually make things harder. So going down in number of words is often a good indicator. If I went through and marked the key content from this paragraph and went down and tried to mark it here, would I be missing anything? And finally, have I really gone from CALP to BICS? Sometimes we rewrite and we replace academic words with other academic words, and we really want to search for those everyday playground type words if we can. Here's another passage we could practice on. Americans fiercely debated whether to approve the Constitution. Many people were afraid it gave the government too much power. Americans had just fought the Revolutionary War to protect their rights against the British government. They wanted to be sure their new government would respect their rights. So this is the issue that I'm trying to get into here, this hook, is that the Constitution and the fear that people had of the Constitution was that, it was just going to make things like they were before. Things were pretty bad before, and the people who thought they were bad before were afraid that this new Constitution was going to ruin things, put things kind of back to the way they were under the British government. So they wanted to be sure their new government would respect their rights. This is a great time to have a discussion about rights and to wake up kids' experiences about being involved in situations where they are powerless and powerful. And those are good civics concepts to talk about, because civics has a lot to do with the emotional and affective content of our lives. 46 words in that passage. I pick it because of its emotional content. And I rewrite it to see if I can make it shorter and punchier, but not lose the content that's there. Did Americans want a constitution? They argued angrily. People worried about the bossy government. After all, they'd just gotten rid of the British. Would a new government care about people's rights? I have a hard time getting away from the word government, because that's what this is all about, and constitution, that's what it's all about. If I'm thinking about that, I really probably want to spend plenty of time before I even get to this passage building background knowledge on constitution, government, and I'm going to go visual if I possibly can. Visuals of the Constitution, visuals of government buildings, Congress meeting, people speaking in front of court, those kinds of things, really big visual ideas about what these words are going to mean. And I really want to have a wake up in terms of rights, bossiness, debate. These are all concepts that are going to help me with this passage in this chapter. But my rewrite has taken me down by 33%. My sentence and phrases, I've tried to make simpler sentences that are shorter and punchier, and I've tried to change the language from CALP down to BICS. So everyday language rather than schoolish language. So that's exactly what's involved in the rewriting. If I asked you to do the same thing with the passage, what would you do? If you had to go to a textbook and find that hook passage that had some emotional content to it or everyday content to it that you think, my kids could really get in if that paragraph was our entry point instead of starting from the beginning. And then once you've chosen that passage, can you then select the passages around it that will support you in understanding it more and asking and answering questions? Then spend some time just paring down the text in and around that hook passage and the selected supporting passages, and then just rewrite that hook passage to try to make it more into a Bix approach. So here's one that I would ask you to practice with. I'll go ahead and post in the class a copy of this. This is from a Colorado history textbook that in various districts in Colorado is taught in 4th grade and sometimes in 3rd grade. In many areas of DPS, Colorado history is in the 3rd grade curriculum instead of the 4th grade curriculum, which poses significant challenges for that district because the texts the people who write the texts have been coached to write for 4th grade level, and so they're thinking a little bit higher in terms of experience with academic vocabulary. So I already did number 1. I already did select. I found a passage in this chapter on relations with Native Americans where I just thought this is a really interesting hook passage. It's got some conflict in it about horses and having rights taken away and being told to do things that you don't want to do. I think I can really help kids find their way into this passage. And so a rewrite for this, I want you to give it a try, and then I'm going to show you a couple of passages that I've done with this as well. The key thing that I've done with this is that I've written it down a level twice, because I think that writing it down the first level might change it from cognitive academic language down to basic interpersonal communication, social speech. But I also really need to think about kids who need more support than that. English language learners, kids with IEPs and 504s that are language oriented and so on. So I'll post a 2-level rewrite for you to see. So the reading strategies, again, are really important here. One of the key strategies we want to use is previewing. We want our kids to look through these passages we're going to have them read and find hard words for them and actually mark those hard words and think about them before they get to them in the run of reading the text. We want to spend time activating the knowledge, and it's not just what do you know. We really want to get to this idea of what do you feel? We might use a standard story structure for social studies. Somebody wanted, but so. This is a narrative structure that's commonly used in the social studies, and to ask kids to think about who wanted what, and then what happened that was the conflict, and then what did they do. So spend time also connecting to self-life, to other texts that they know. We spend too little time asking kids to connect to movies and TV that would give them background knowledge about the things that they're studying in school, and gaming as well. Follow-up questions. We want to be ready, let kids know that we're going to be asking who, what, when, where, why, and how questions as we move on. And that's the WL in the KWL. If you think about that KWL strategy, I've got the K marked here, 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 and the W and L marked here. All right. That farmers and ranchers passage, I really want visual context for this, so I'm going to spend time actually getting kids there with searched images and videos if I can get them. So actually spend the time building up background knowledge that way before you get to this textbook passage. You can see the arrows that are pointing to the textbook passage here that I've selected. Just these pieces right here, one long paragraph. That's my hook passage, and you can see that it's not involving this passage, not involving this passage, but after I've read this, I'm going to skim and scan through this passage, this caption over here, this caption down here. I'm going to flip the page and look through the entire chapter. This is a subsection, so I'm going to look through the sections before that to see if there are other passages that are going to support me in helping kids read this. Here's some of the research that supports the ideas that I'm talking about right here. I'll make sure that this PowerPoint is posted as well so that you can get back to some of these references if you'd like to have arguments about why you would do things this way. One of the key ones that's here is the The original article on Bix and Calp is by Jim Cummins. This technique that I'm using is strongly based on the cooperative reading activity by Michael Opitz, who is an emeritus faculty member at UNC and was one of the strongest reading professors that UNC has had in many decades. So those are a couple that I'd like you to take a look at if you get a chance. You'll also notice that Fisher and Fry, these are key names that you're going to see in the area of teaching vocabulary really often. All right. I'll go ahead and stop there. Look for the other materials around this, and I'm going to ask you to actually do a rewrite during this upcoming module.